All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to Office Hours. It's March 11th, 2020. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the CEO and founder of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator that helps startups own their infrastructure in record time by building it for you and then showing you the ropes. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered, so feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in to participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. We host these calls every week. We'll automatically post a video of this recording to the Office Hours channel on our Slack team, as well as follow up with an email so you can share it with your team. If you want to share something in private, just ask and we can temporarily suspend the recording. With that said, let's kick this off. All right, so what we have today are a couple of talking points that came up in the last day or so, at least in my own dabblings here. One thing I'm really excited about is that it was just announced yesterday or something that EKS now has envelope encryption for secrets in EKS. That is that those secrets are separately encrypted with a KMS key. Not only that, the Terraform EKS, okay, I linked to the wrong issue here. That's the EKS module by the AWS, by the guys at the Terraform AWS modules. There's a referenced pull request into the Terraform provider to add support for this, so it's already supported. And then the other thing is Helm 2, I'm excited about this one, that Helm 3.2 is going to restore that functionality to create namespaces automatically for you. I totally get your point, Andrew. I saw your comment there by Bacon Gobbler on why it's nice sometimes not to have this functionality. Our use case is very frequently in preview environments where we bring up environments from scratch that we want to have that namespace created for us. And in that case, having Helm do it just reduces the number of escape hatches we need to use to get stuff deployed. And that's been nice. Any other news you guys have seen? Would like to call out?
People around the world are doing a lot of work from home stuff. I'm excited about that. I'm hoping that might kick off some kind of, new wave of
a revolution.
More working, a work from home revolution. That'd be cool.
Yeah, and create even more problems in the commercial real estate sector. As if retail stores shutting down wasn't enough. Now, next thing we know, Google announces they're closing all offices. And
yeah, I've been working from home for like the past 5-6 years, and it's definitely better than going into the office.
Yeah.
2.5 years for me. So
I think it goes both ways. Obviously, I'm working on right now. But that's why we have these office hours, so we get some of the same banter.
So I've done, I did 2 years. I started an LLC, my own business. It was like, tiny little consultant shop. I did 2 years of that and got super lonely because it was literally the only people I talked to all day were customers, and you have to be like on all the time when you're talking to a customer. Now I'm going on 2 years with a team of like 10 people, and we talk every day on Zoom and Slack and everything, and that's been 100% better.
Do any of you guys have like just channels you can join at any time and talk or hang out, or is it always deliberate?
Absolutely.
Oh, interesting.
Yep, definitely. We got a random channel, and we have
or like any video channels or any like video rooms, so to say, where people are just hanging out or working.
My team has a couple of different Zoom accounts, and someone's usually in one of them, but no, not usually.
I'm just curious if that's worked for anyone.
The one thing we used to do as a part of our help desk team, since the help desk was global, we'd have everybody on a Zoom all day long. Meaning from like when your shift started to when your shift ended, you were on a Zoom the whole time. And like for the first like 2 weeks, you're kind of like, what the hell's going on? Like, why, these people are just constantly watching me. But then you realize it's so helpful because you could literally look up and be like, oh, like Tom's online. I could just be like, hey, Tom, can you unmute? And it's just so much easier, especially in a global help desk team, compared to like somebody sitting next to you. So I know that is one thing that I've done in the past, where you just had this one Zoom ID that was a help desk Zoom, and everybody was just always on.
And everyone's just muted by default. And when you want to, that's kind of interesting. It's kind of a take on like the Slack channel instead. Did people protest that at all?
I guess as people join the team, like the first week or two is definitely kind of weird, but you definitely realize the benefit of it though. Because like, let's say a guy that's sitting next to you is actually at lunch, you could just be like, hey, I'm in New York, you're in Austin, or you're in London, like I need help with this. He's like, oh yeah, I got you right now. And it's just, I feel like you solve problems a lot quicker.
Yeah.
That's kind of the benefit that we got out of it. And I think there were
100%. Yeah, I totally agree.
Protested it, and then it's just like, all right, if you feel uncomfortable, it's like, just turn off your video when you're not at your desk.
Exactly.
Yeah. But
it
some
doesn't
people
necessarily have to give up any privacy at all. I mean, turn mute and turn off video. It's like,
yeah. And then if you're not there, then it's like, all right, you're not available. But like being on the Zoom, it's like, hey, can I bug you for this? And like if you were missing, it's like, oh, you might be with another customer or something like that.
In my team, we've started doing like, I won't say we're doing XP yet, but like we've started doing a lot of pair programming, and so that's been really nice on Zoom too. Typical XP is like 2 desks, 2 chairs, 2 keyboards, 2 monitors, 1 computer, right? That's like typical XP, and you can mimic it with Zoom. One person hosts and the other person clicks request keyboard and mouse control, and that way they can break in whenever they want. And it's been nice.
Yeah, that goes in line a little bit with what you were asking before we kicked off office hours. Actually, like, what's your protocol for? Your question was kind of, what's your protocol for when it's okay to give somebody the keys to the kingdom? Like, what's the process for that? How do you determine that somebody's ready for that level of responsibility and trust?
When they don't want it.
If
If they're overeager to get that stuff, if people are overeager for it, then there's, it's like, how much do you really need? I try to eliminate those rights for myself wherever I can. And, typically that overeagerness scares me, so.
It's a little bit like on a need to know basis, and I think those need to know bases come up as their responsibility naturally increases. So I don't think that one needs to give that out automatically or by any compulsory milestone.
Less is more.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Any questions or interesting observations anybody else has from the community?
This AWS Bottle Rocket Container OS looks interesting. Is this something that's been around for a while, or I just stumbled across it today?
They just announced it.
Yeah, but I think I've seen some mentions of it. I'm a little burned out on the like container native OS thing, just with the number of OSs out there, and then so like Core OS, that's what it was, and it just went EOL like last week or something.
Same with Rancher OS. When I looked at Bottle Rocket, I was like, man, this sounds a lot like Rancher OS. And I was looking at Rancher OS, and then all of a sudden I found out they're not working on it anymore. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, the timing's a little bit off to come out with another OS when so many OSs are getting killed.
Well, if you're rolling your own Kubernetes clusters, what OS would you use?
Well, on Amazon, I'm just going to use the standard Amazon Linux, whatever they ship default. And if they're going to make this the default, fine, so be it. I don't want to be concerned with it at the level that we operate. Different companies have many different requirements. I think certain enterprises, maybe like Disney or something, require that you must run this version of enterprise Red Hat. But we try not to play that game if we can avoid it. And companies get into that because they have their own RPM distributions or whatever, and their own signed packages and their own way of doing it, and teams that manage that, which then makes this even less palatable to pick. Okay, we're going to now suddenly pick Bottle Rocket, which has no historical proof of that is going to stick around for a while. Now, Amazon, this would be really interesting. I don't know, like, what services has Amazon deprecated in the last 12 months, for example, compared to, like, say, Google or others?
I do not have an answer for that.
So one stops making them any more money.
Well, that's Google's thing, right?
That's Google's strategy, right? But Amazon has been a little bit more more relationship commitment based.
The concern I would have with Bottle Rocket is, I mean, just go to the GitHub repo and read the README, and you can immediately tell that the vast majority of their efforts are going to be focused on, EKS and AWS only, and so if you come in, like, there's a comment that got added. I don't remember when it got added, but it was like, hey, this would be awesome on Raspberry Pi. Not a single response. And so, but it's like, yeah, okay, Amazon's making Bottle Rocket, and they've already said their first, variant or whatever is going to be for EKS. So unless you're using EKS, it's not for you.
Yeah, it's going to take a while for all the variants to come out.
So I've been doing a lot of work with the Air Force. Has this new initiative called DSOP, or it's got a bunch of different names, but Platform One is another name for it. And this guy, Nicholas Chalon, he's the Air Force Chief Software Officer. He's this guy he's from France. He's he's got this crazy French accent, and he's brilliant. Like, he's he's a serial entrepreneur. He was a multimillionaire by like 25, and he's got a ton of patents and stuff. And so, but he's kind of leading the charge on DevSecOps inside DoD, and so he's got this whole initiative going with, OCI container native, Kubernetes native platform, and it's completely vendor agnostic. So it's, all my efforts lately have been, oh, Lambda? Pfft, no, we're not using that. We're using Knative or whatever, so like this whole Bottle Rocket thing, he would just go, ha, that's AWS. We're not using that. No way. If I can't install it anywhere in the world, including on a frickin' Humvee, I'm not interested.
Interesting. So basically going for the lowest common denominator across these systems.
100%, yes. So like even they're using a lot of OpenShift, but they're not allowed to use, they're specifically saying you're not allowed to use any of OpenShift's special sauce. You're not allowed to use OpenShift build runtime or whatever it's called, and all that other special OpenShift stuff. You have to use whatever is CNCF compliant.
Is OpenShift making any strides, or is it infeasible rather to have it installed strictly on top of Kubernetes? Does it always have to be installed at the same level as the control plane itself?
OpenShift is a distribution of Kubernetes. Yeah. So
Right.
it is in place of vanilla Kubernetes. There's a bunch of different ones out there now. There's like VMware Tanzu, there's OpenShift,
There was Rancher, but my understanding is Rancher is now building on top of, like, you can run Rancher on EKS.
Yeah, Rancher's just a Helm deployment now. You can deploy it anywhere on any Kubernetes cluster.
With the dumbest namespace ever. So.
Cattle system.
Yeah.
Cattle system.
And,
that's the namespace for Rancher's cattle system. Cattle system.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know. And it's like you can't change it. You try to change it and it breaks everything.
Exactly. That's what I'm like. It's just weird. So.
No, Rancher's nice though. I've been using it for a while now, and it's
I still don't understand
I'm liking
what
it.
adds. I've never quite, gotten far enough along with it to get the value add. So
for me, it's the user management. It's so easy. So easy to provision users and say, okay, this is a new team that I'm bringing on, and they need access to these 5 namespaces. So I'm gonna, I can hook it up to LDAP or whatever I want, and I can say, okay, these 5 users have access to these 5 namespaces, and done.
It seems like that should be a CRD type of deployment that you can just do declaratively when you add in new teams. I don't know.
There's a Terraform provider. I can make Terraform for any of that stuff.
Yeah.
It's just when do we start using Kubernetes to make business logic type of, constructs like that? I'm looking forward to that day. So.
Yeah. Speaking of CRDs, any new discoveries, Zach?
No, I've been knee deep in trying to figure out whether I'm making a huge mistake in pushing out managed Postgres schemas and users and stuff like that through Terraform or not. So, unfortunately,
as opposed to
just having it all in some custom script somewhere. Because right now I'm working around managed. So you can't. It might be my own ignorance when it comes to Terraform, but at what point do you draw the line between the actual configuration of the system and provisioning of it?
Right.
So with managed Postgres, we're doing deployments where we need to have a firewall rule that's going to only allow certain IPs through. So if you want to have pipelines that also do these updates and run Terraform to do these things, you need to be able to apply that basically the CICD firewall access to do these changes to this managed Postgres instance. And if you want to do that, then you have to have some sort of dependency. So you can't really use the provider for Postgres, right? Because providers you can't have any real dependencies upon. So I'm just working around all sorts of weird oddball issues like that and realizing how much Terraform I love and I hate at the same time.
Yeah. That was our experience. Like in the provider thing, you're saying how like you can't provision the database and set up the permissions in the same project.
Yeah, is that the case in general? Am I?
Yeah, no, that's the case because the private. Well, unless it's changed recently, we had the same problem basically that the provider errors because the host name doesn't exist because you haven't created it yet.
Right.
So it's like day 2 operations versus day 0.
Have the same thing doing Amazon MQ services. You have to create the config, an XML config, but you can't create it until you know the host names that you want the networks, the brokers to be networked together with. And it's kind of ugly passing in some count flags to make it do something really simple and then increment it to make it do something more like what you want.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's the same kind of scenario. It's frustrating.
Yeah, chicken and egg scenarios abound in Terraform.
It's that cold start thing is one thing. Therefore, we don't overinvest in and focus more on what's the day-to-day operations going to be like, adding and removing stuff and worrying about that.
That being said, how would you then move forward and do like a PaaS-based system where you add another, say, Postgres schema or something along those lines? Do you use Terraform or do you just make it into some other pipeline with some custom script?
Right. It basically comes down, what you're describing is a pipeline of operations. So moving that into whatever system your organization has adopted. This is the problem with Terraform itself, is that there's like no concept of an operator unless you consider a provider to be that. And dropping into Go every time we want to do that isn't what I think would be our solution for that problem.
Right.
A lot of people in my company would say to use ServiceNow.
Everyone says
Yeah.
use ServiceNow. There's some sort of ServiceNow
Please
Kool-Aid being
don't.
passed around. So
Fascinating. Cool. Any other questions or talking points?
I think someone, Casey, had one. But I had one selfishly. What's everybody's thoughts on AWS certifications?
I'll give one point of view. I mean,
right.
so AWS certifications are more valuable if you're going to go into working with enterprises, which use that whole resume filtering type system for that. The other is depending on the kind of company you want to work with. So a consultancy like Cloud Posse, we move up the ranks the more certified engineers we have. So that makes an engineer who passes all the other requirements more interesting if they also happen to have like the AWS certifications, because we can then move towards like advanced or premier tiers.
What do you mean by Cloud Posse moves up the rankings?
Oh, so there are different tiers of AWS partners.
Oh, okay. Like
And
when it comes to partnerships.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Like, what is it? Microsoft has like the gold partner, and and so
yeah, exactly. That's
okay.
So that becomes that makes you more competitive if you want to work for a consultancy like that. Other than that, what I think is great about our industry in general is it's a meritocracy. It's based on what you've done recently and your accomplishments. So that speaks, I think, more than just your technical understanding of some of these certifications, which can't make up for experience.
For sure, yeah.
I kind of see it the same way as your GPA in college. When's the last time someone asked what your GPA in college was when you're doing a job interview?
These good degrees, man.
Hopefully nobody's been asked that question after their first job.
Right.
Or even in their first job.
Yeah.
I have seen, I don't really have any certifications, and it hasn't hurt me yet. And I've worked with a lot of people who have all kinds of certifications and are terrible. So, just because you have a certification doesn't mean you're good.
I recently went through the process for Cloud Posse, and I've been working with AWS since 2006 or so a really, really long time since it was in a private beta. And many questions were very ambiguous to me based on all my experience in working with AWS. And clearly they're asking or they're prodding for one answer. And that answer is very much based on their documentation, so much so that you can often search for it and find that wording. But if you learned it more organically, it can be like, well, do you mean it like this way or this way or this way? And that was my frustration. So I had to literally whip out the flashcards and memorize the wording to get it right.
Appreciate that. Yeah, because I'm looking into it now, just more like I've probably been working with AWS heavily for the past 2 years. And I know how our company uses it, and I almost look at it as an opportunity to kind of see, I think for the certified solutions architect, like associate level, it kind of gives you just a big picture of AWS in general, just studying for it,
I think it's a great way to rapidly increase your exposure to all of that stuff. And like anything in life, I would do it if it's worth it for you. I wouldn't do it if it's worth it to reach some. Unless your goal is to reach that company requires it, then that fits that objective. But if you're doing it because hypothetically this could help your job prospects, that's maybe not a concrete enough goal.
Yeah. Okay, good enough. Yeah, I think I had already decided. I just wanted, I guess, to validate my decision.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
It's also, no, let's leave it at that. So Casey Kent asks a question in chat here. Question when you can get to it. When do you think it's necessary to provision another cluster? Thinking about doing this to put data like Airflow, ETL, etc., related Kubernetes deployments away from production infrastructure. I could also add some tainted nodes on production cluster as well. Personally, I like per project clusters. So Zach answers, personally, I like per project clusters and possibly dedicated stateful data and shared services clusters as well. So yeah, my 2 cents on this is, so I can say what we've been doing, and then I can share kind of some of the pros and cons with our approach that I have to reconcile. I don't think we have the perfect answer, or anyone does, but so Kubernetes is in itself a platform, right? And there's 2 ways of looking at it. One is your operations team, or how big your company is, depends if you even have that. But you can be providing Kubernetes as a platform, where that platform is almost like Amazon is a platform. So there is one production tier of Amazon for all of us. Everyone in this Zoom session here, we're all using the same Amazon. It's not like we have access to a staging Amazon. Amazon is providing Amazon as a service to all of us at the same tier. So you as a company could be doing that with Kubernetes. That means that your Kubernetes, your staging environments, your preview environments, acceptance testing, data, everything could be running on that same platform. And that platform would have the SLA of the minimum or the maximum SLA corresponding to the service with the highest SLA. Now, what we've been doing at Cloud Posse is not doing that approach, because ultimately you need to dog food your clusters. You need to have environments where you can be testing operational work at the platform layer that is outside of production. And if you're doing this in strictly a test bed environment, you don't have real world usage going on, and it's harder to pick up some of the kinds of things that can go wrong. So what we predominantly do in a typical engagement is we roll out a minimum of 3 clusters and up to about 5 clusters, and they work out like this. So we have a dev cluster that's in a sandbox account where we can literally do anything. There is basically 0 SLA on that cluster or that environment. Then we have a staging cluster. This is as good as production without the strings attached of having to notify customers or anything like that if anything goes down. And it allows the team to build up operational competency in a pre-production kind of environment. And then we have a data cluster. So this is kind of addressing your question directly, Casey. And the data is more for a specific team. And that team tends to be like the data scientists, the machine learning folks to operate. And that environment typically needs elevated access to other kinds of data perhaps that emanates from production or different resources or endpoints. So that cluster will have its own VPC and its own VPC gateways and be in its own actual AWS account. And then we can better control IAM and egress from that cluster. And then lastly, there's the production cluster. What I'd like to, in the production cluster, what I mean by that is it's production for your end users, your customers. But what I've described here has there's an Achilles heel to this. And it's that every cluster I described is production for some user group. So the staging cluster is more or less production inwards facing for the company and your QA engineers. And everything comes to a grinding halt from a QA process and testing process if that cluster is offline. One other cluster I forgot to mention is a corp cluster, and the corp cluster sits in a separate AWS account and is for internally facing. So it's like production for engineering. It'll run your Keycloak servers, and perhaps your Jenkins servers, etc. Your point about running multiple node pools is a good one, and I still think that is another tactic to have in your toolbox that you should use. A perfect example is if you are, for some reason running Atlantis, we would probably then say run Atlantis maybe in your corp cluster, but should it run in a standard node pool? Probably not. It should probably run in a separate node pool that's tighter, with more, that's more locked down in terms of what can run there. And then that cluster as a whole, you really want to lock that down because you have like this pod there, that a God pod that you can exec into and do anything. So this is another example of like when, considerations of when you want to have really separate segmented clusters and environments where the reality of just using IAM and RBAC and all those things to lock it down is, in my mind, a little bit insufficient for it. So the problem here is that we have this corp cluster that's production for internal apps. So, it's okay if it's down a little bit, but it shouldn't be down a lot. And then you have your staging cluster, which is production for QA. You have your dev cluster, which is kind of production for developers to do testing and stuff. So, the more unstable that is, the more everything else is impacted. And then you have production for your clusters. And the configuration of these clusters is more or less different out of necessity because they have different roles. And does that mean we need a staging, the concept of staging for each of these clusters? And more or less, I argue, yes. It's just that we haven't found a customer that wants to invest in that level of automation. Related to this, there was a Hacker News post 1 or 2 weeks ago announcing, GKE's new pricing change for the control plane. And a lot of people were up in arms over that change. And I forget exactly the context that led to this comment, but the comment was by Seth Vargo. And his comment was, wait, so why are you guys treating your clusters as pets? They should be, cattle. The clusters themselves as cattle. Part of me reacts like, all right, you're coming from Google. I know you do some amazing engineering over there, and you're able to do all of that type of stuff like Netflix does as well. They do full-on freaking blue-green regions and availability zones and all that stuff. It's just that for most people, they don't have the engineering bandwidth in-house to be able to orchestrate and do that with regularity. And the reality is clusters have integration touch points to all the systems that you depend on, be they API keys and secrets or webhooks and callbacks and all of that stuff. And orchestrating that from zero to the end is a monumental task. My point is, it'd be nice if each of these clusters were production like I described, but also had the equivalent of like a blue-green strategy. And that would allow a staggered rollout of each of these environments. All right, that was a mouthful. Any questions on what I said or clarifications? Somebody also shared a link. Andrew Roth shared a link on how many clusters. I haven't seen that link. Andrew, do you want to summarize it?
I read it. I read this link, this article, I don't know, a few months ago, and it really brought home, kind of the dilemma, because the core of the question is, you can do one big large shared cluster, and it's cheaper and it's easier to manage, but then your blast radius is really big and everything. Or you can go all the way to the other side and you can have like clusters all over the place. And
it's really good.
But this table is like, so you just have to, for your particular environment, you just have to pick, which little box in this table you're in.
I'll summarize. They didn't give an answer. So I read this article as well. Google also put forth some recommendations around this, and they explicitly recommend per team/project type of setup. So I'll try to find the link and send it out here shortly. But yeah, there isn't an answer. It's completely nebulous at the moment.
Well, there can never be an answer, I think, is the bigger point. It's based on, you select which of these you're optimizing for, and you can optimize for one, for solving one of these, but you can't optimize for solving the entire matrix.
Right.
Yep. We're just getting started with Rancher, but I think it's gonna make our lives easier when it comes to this kind of stuff, because we're gonna be able to centralize user management, but decentralize cluster management, or clusters themselves. So if I have a new team, I will manage those users in Rancher and create for them a cluster all for themselves, and use Rancher to give them access to that cluster.
And you're running and you're using COPS for all the aforementioned reasons you mentioned, right?
I think we're going to get away from COPS because
yeah,
it's kind of not very secure, we think.
Mm.
RKE is what we're looking at right now.
OpenShift has a really elaborate permissions model.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that they were using. He was mentioning earlier. RKE is
Rancher Kubernetes Engine.
Okay.
It's
is like their enterprise offering, or
it's the you have your servers and it's how you install Kubernetes. It's a alternative to like kubeadmin.
Gotcha.
And it's a lot simpler. It's one text config file YAML, and it's you point it at the config file and you say RKE up, and bam, there's your Kubernetes cluster. And there is a currently in development kind of beta Terraform provider that I've used that worked really well, actually. So I'm excited about it.
Also for RKE, or
for RKE, yep. So in one swift stroke, I was able to use Terraform to provision EC2 nodes, and then come along afterwards with RKE to install Kubernetes, and then even come along after that with the Helm provider for Terraform to install Rancher. And so with one Terraform apply, I went from absolutely nothing to a VPC with nodes in it, with Kubernetes installed, with Rancher installed using Helm.
Wow, that sounds pretty cool.
So that was very exciting to me, and it all worked perfectly.
Has the Helm provider been updated yet to support Helm 3?
I don't know, but I'm going to be looking into that soon, so I'll let you know.
Yeah, I looked into that maybe a month or so ago. I was curious if any movement on that. Given how fast many things in the Terraform ecosystem move, I was a little bit surprised that Helm 3 hadn't been supported already, since it was in beta for quite some time before going GA.
Well, and if anything, it should be easier because there's no tiller.
Yeah, to a degree.
So, I don't know. What with the whole GitOps movement, you guys are very heavy into Helmfile.
Yeah.
Do you see yourselves getting away from Helmfile and using something like Argo at any point?
Argo technically can do Helmfile.
Oh, it can?
Yeah, Argo is kind of like a workflow management. So yeah. You need Helmfile less. You can define it in Argo. I would say part of our challenge is that we need to be able to describe reusable components that we can use across customers and implementations, and Helmfile is kind of that reusable component that lets us describe the logic of how to do it.
Yep.
So there are things I love and hate about Helmfile, and part of the thing is that it's just been the Swiss Army knife for us to solve anything. in the end user experience is not that bad once we get to using environments. I'll show you an example. Then it's really quite nice. So if I go to look at quickly an example of what that is, projects, and let's go to Helm files and go to like forecastle maybe conf. So all we ultimately expose is just a very simple schema like this for what you need to change. And everything that, doesn't matter how, like the actual Helm file for this could be rather nasty. Just like everything else in Terraform can be pretty nasty. So this is the schema that the developer exposed, the maintainer of that chart, which we have no control over. But we reduce that to all we've, our opinionated version of all you need to care about. All you need to care about is that.
Yeah, we're doing something similar with Helm files now. We've done GitLab, Keycloak, OpenLDAP, Claire.
I must have about 30 Helm
I'm
files
trying
for
to get
current engagement that I've been on. So yeah, I use it single-handedly to construct and weave out whole stacks of clusters for a client as they made changes on the fly to their requirements. So it is definitely a good glue tool. Where I did struggle is bridging that gap between Argo type of applications and Helm files. So I mean, I was looking at the Helm file operator amongst other things to ease that transition, but I never really got that far. So
yeah,
I did notice that there are ways to make Helm file work through Argo CD. It's not something that they do by default, but it's something that there's custom tools that you can apply to Argo CD to make it work. So it is undeniably one of my saving graces in this current project I was on, though, the Helm file, and the reason why I'm even on this call is some examples of your Helm file repo. So thank you, by the way. So.
Of which, so we're refactoring a lot of our Helm file stuff to support the latest stuff I just showed you here, and we'll be contributing that stuff upstream later on this year. I can't say yet when, but as soon as the dust settles, we'll get back to that. One thing that kind of made my head spin, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, but this conversation jogged this. Who shared this? Was it you, Zach? Arcade?
At one point, I don't know if I shared it, but I did definitely run across it. So
yeah, so this kind of it makes my head hurt a little bit to go down this route, and this is kind of like this is somewhere like, well, why are we using text templating to parameterize values for Helm, and when is this madness going to stop, and when are we going to use a more formal language to do it, and how can we? And it also speaks to the presenting a CLI for your team to install things and giving you like the ability to do all the testing exposed by Golang. I mean, this could be done in any language, right? This could be done in Python or Ruby or whatever. So they've picked Go, obviously, for this project. And what makes my head hurt, I mean, the end result is, I think, something that, Blaze might have shared it, he says. What in the end makes my head hurt is that every app you want to add to the catalog, you literally whip up a whole bunch of Go code to generate the YAML to install. So yeah, look.
No thanks.
You definitely solved it. Like, yeah, you're not templating YAML anymore, but the barrier to entry and the maintenance around this, I really wonder if this is going to be a long-lived project.
I think anything that puts it into a CLI makes it certainly easier to test the waters, but it doesn't make it any easier to pipeline.
Yeah.
So, or it certainly doesn't, it makes it more interesting, but it's like the EKS CTL command, like Why not? Why would I use that if I have Terraform? You know,
And
I want to do repeatable builds, you know. So.
And it flies in the face of using kind of GitOps, where you want to have a declarative description, a document that describes how to deploy it. And
I want to have a T-shirt that says "Declarative Nation" on it. I think that's the underpinning thing that is making this whole movement so exciting. So
I don't think the and I could be wrong, but I don't think that the makers of Arcade are interested in, you know, production grade type of deployments.
Different target, maybe.
You know, they're because this is Arcade is strongly correlated with Ketchup, which is strongly correlated with K3S, which is, you know,
Absolutely.
have a Kubernetes cluster up and running in 10 seconds. You know, it's all about get something going as quickly and easily as possible. And, well, hell yeah, Arcade install Cert Manager. If that's all I have to frickin' do, then cool, you know?
Yeah. I guess where it's interesting is like what we see here is, to me, or this is, no, there are other examples. I'm sure you guys can give some examples, but this is kind of like our Helm files repository, where we're distributing an opinionated installation of a bunch of Helm files. Any other distributions like that, like our Helm files, but using other tooling that you guys can point me to, I'd appreciate, just so I can get inspiration. Feel free to share that.
That's not Helm file?
That's not Helm file based. Or, well, dude, if anybody else sees another Helm file repository with a dozen or so Helm files, do let me know about that too, because I'm always, that's how we learn from each other, is to see patterns that other people are doing.
Yeah, I'm trying to get ours. I'm going to try to get ours open source, but no promises.
Yeah.
There are 2 or 3 other tools that are similar to Helm file, but none as comprehensive and able in my mind. So.
Yeah.
We used Helmsman for a long time, over a year, and we switched to Helm file.
Yeah. Helm file, by the way, has reached almost 2,000 stars now, so that's pretty exciting.
Hey, if anybody knows Rob or whatever his name is, you feel free to let him know that I'd be open to working for Datadog now.
Yeah, he's not very involved at all anymore in the Helm project. I saw him chime in briefly when there was talk of contributing the project to Cloud Native Foundation, but that was the last engagement I saw from him. I've never spoken with the guy. I was so confused there for a second, Andrew. I thought you were talking, but I think you were.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just
stretching out those.
But no, I was saying we have a Helm file repo, of not a dozen, but maybe half a dozen now. But trying to get them open source is going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
But I'm going to try.
Cool. Yeah, do hit me up as soon as if you do get those open source.
Yeah, because we our whole philosophy was we've got our biggest one is GitLab by far, because GitLab's Helm chart is a fucking monstrosity. Sorry, pardon my French.
It is.
That's an understatement.
We want our people, when they run Helm file install GitLab or whatever the command ends up being, with all the defaults, that there's a bunch more required parameters, but once they have met all the required parameters, it deploys production ready. Like, it uses an external Postgres database. It doesn't use, because by default it uses a container, which sometimes is okay, but for us it's not, right? So what we say instead is, we don't care what you run, but it has to be external, So if you want to run a container on the side, and that's how you're going to say you're going to run your production ready GitLab, then fine. But we will not, turn on the little flag in the Helm chart to run the internal Postgres database. Same thing with like cert manager. We don't turn on the internal cert manager. Same thing with Minio. We don't turn on Minio. We make them, say, okay, what's the names of the S3 buckets, and what's the, if it's not AWS S3, what's the URL to the, to the S3 host.
Yeah, subcharts tend to work against you with home files, so I end up breaking them out as well.
So it's been the little experiment has been very nice, because it's been the number one challenge when it comes to Helm, especially with all these open source charts. It's like, okay, fine, I see that there's 500 different configuration parameters I can set, and that's awesome. Which ones do I set for this to be production ready?
Yeah.
I have no idea, and there's no documentation to tell me.
And it's and a little bit like that matrix we saw for how many clusters do I need. That matrix is going to be different from your org and differ from org to org.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's this concept of composability, which is like the property of being able to like copy something out from one context and paste it into another. And that seems to be like, I'm having a lot of like PTSD around the Helm stuff and like Maven, like Palm XML. Like
of course you have PTSD if you've been using
it's like you want to take this snippet of XML and drop it, or just moving stuff from one file to another and not having the right context. That was one of the banes of my existence. And I don't know if Helm file simplifies that or makes things more modular. I have no experience with Helm file.
I think Helm file gives you the opportunity to be internally consistent with an organization for composability that way by having a common interface. But like our Helm files aren't going to be composable with your Helm files, aren't in that same way.
You almost always have to put your own framework around what your needs are. So.
Yeah.
I found that doing things like not enabling default ingress and things like that for a lot of charts certainly helps. Keeping those things completely segmented and in their own, own mono repo.
So I gotta keep things. Generic. But you talked about enabling ingress. So the reason I asked about what's the process for giving people the keys to the castle and stuff is because we gave the keys to the castle too soon to someone, and a bunch of ingresses were created to things that shouldn't have been created and caused issues. So now I get to look at admission controllers for all kinds of, like for ingresses, for Istio virtual services, for services. If it's a service and it's not a cluster IP, I want to reject it.
That's really cool.
And so I'm going to use OPA, and I'm excited. I'm going to.
You're hopefully you can do like
come up with a little demo or something.
For that.
That'd be really cool. Awesome. I really like to see what you do.
Yeah. It looks deceptively easy, I guess I'll say. I'll put it that way. Because I mean, the OPA docs are like, hey, here's 8 lines of code, and that'll do it. So we'll see.
Yeah. There's always a big gap between hello world and production.
Yeah. But I mean, it should be very straightforward, because admission controllers look at a particular type of resource, right? And just do checks on it. So it should say, for all services, if type does not equal cluster IP, reject. Other than, a small whitelist, like Nginx ingress needs load balancer. But we'll see.
Yeah, that's. I think this is interesting because I think this is the 4th or 5th office hours in a row where OPA has come up. So I think that is an indicator of how relevant that is if you're doing anything serious with production on Kubernetes or Terraform.
Yeah.
So, all right, we got 5 minutes left here. Are there any closing thoughts or last minute questions?
It was nice to finally meet you at scale.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for poking in and saying hi. That's Todd, right?
10-4.
Cool. Did you go to any other interesting talks at scale?
They had one that we were talking about. It was primarily around Java apps inside of Cube and using things like Grail to minimize startup times, using things to compress Docker images down. We've got some apps that take 60 to 90 seconds to start up, and the prospect of getting that down to 2 or 3 seconds is more than just a little enticing.
Is that
2 or 3
largely
milliseconds?
Is that largely
Seriously.
because of the image size, or?
That's Java.
To some degree,
It's Tomcat or you know, whatever.
Spring.
Yeah, Spring.
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat, dude. I hear you. We got a bunch of Spring Boot apps, and they're slow.
And to the point that we don't, whenever we're setting our limits, we for memory we set the request and the limit the same, and then for the CPU we set the request and we just don't set the limit because startup times get a little better if we just let it consume everything it can.
I've been reading that you shouldn't set CPU limits, like really for anything, because it's different than memory limits. Like it doesn't work the same way, and you're just artificially limiting things when they don't need to be limited.
Yeah, originally we were kind of trying to avoid all types of oversubscription, and that's great for memory, but it's kind of screwing us whenever it comes to CPU.
Yeah, because I read an article. I'm trying to remember what the name of the article was or where I would find it, but it was talking about how the CPU scheduler, or whatever it's called, does the requests and the limits, and it was saying if you've got 5 pods and they all request 100% CPU, the CPU of the system will happily hand each of the pods 20% of its CPU. No problem at all, and it can just kind of figure it all out. And that made a lot of sense to me. So I've stopped using CPU limits, or if I have to use CPU limits, because if there's a limit ranger, then I'll do 10.
I think the problem
CPU limit of 10 CPUs.
QoS, quality of service, and if you want to provide any form of guarantees to a service and maintain latencies such that that it wouldn't be a bad idea to keep it up. Do you have a link to that? If you can, when you find it, that'd be great if you share that.
Yeah, I'll try to find it. But I was going to say, have you looked at Quarkus for your Java apps?
I've not heard of that.
Yeah, personally,
it looks really interesting.
You just swear at me or something?
It sounds
Quarkus. Quarkus. I'm going to hang on. I'm going to link it.
Awesome.
I don't think I'm not sure if Spring is supported, but it compiles your Java app to native code. So I mean, the joke I made, not too long ago, that's 2 to 3 seconds. No, try 2 to 3 milliseconds is real. Like it's as fast as a Go app that's compiled to native code. And you can do the same things like install your Java app that's done using Quarkus onto the Scratch container, which is
empty.
It's just the bare Linux kernel with nothing in it, right? Like it's literally the smallest you can possibly get.
basically a native Go app. The guy did mention Quarkus, and to be perfectly forthcoming, I had a hard time following some of what he was saying because it had a very heavy accent, and now I realize that's what he was talking about, compiling it to the native app.
Gotcha. That's cool. Well, if you, Todd, if you go continue your explorations on that and have any wins, that'd be great if you follow up and share those with us on a subsequent office hours.
I'll do what I can. Sounds like Andrew's quite a bit ahead of me already. He knows the names of the things.
Yeah. So, all right, everyone. Thanks you for sharing. Learned a few new things this office hours, as always. Remember to register for our weekly office hours if you haven't already. Go to cloudposse.com/office hours and you'll receive an invite for your calendar. Thanks again for all your time. A recording of this call is going to be posted in the Office Hours channel and syndicated to our podcast at podcast.cloudposse.com. So you can tune in however you listen to your podcasts. See you guys next week, same time, same place.
Thanks.
Thank you guys.
Have a good one, everybody.